Part 59. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 581. You must know that Lin Yu's current points can be said to be very sufficient, and he is completely a wealthy person. After Lin Yu visited the mall, he immediately saw a spiritual storage pill worth 1 million. As long as he swallowed one, his spiritual power could be fully restored instantly. This was simply there is a general existence of cheating. And 1 million is not a huge number for Lin Yu. After all, Lin Yu's assets now start in the hundreds of millions. So at this time, Lin Yu didn't say anything and just exchanged 100 spirit storage pills. Exchange 100 spirit storage pills. Arya heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, she repeated in a low voice, redeeming 100 spirit storage pills will cost 10 million points. Do you want to redeem it? Exchange. At this moment, a small white jade porcelain bottle suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's hand. He opened the small white jade porcelain bottle gently. Inside, there were neatly arranged small pills, and the fragrance of red pills hit his nostrils. At this moment, Lin Yu felt quite relaxed and happy. His face was filled with a look of satisfaction, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Chen Changshen, who was outside the door, was pacing back and forth anxiously at the door of the warehouse. There was a bit of solemnity in the corners of his eyes and brows. His expression also condensed slightly, and then he tightened his gaze. Then he just shook his head. What's going on with this little guy? Why hasn't he come out after such a long time? What is this little guy doing in there now? At this time, the timidity between Chen Changshen's brows became more and more obvious. At this time, he couldn't help but shake his head, and his expression also condensed slightly. At this time, Lin Yu was sitting cross-legged like this, and then he glanced at the egg of the red sand beast. At this time, Lin Yu was gently stroking the strange beast. Egg, gentle as if caressing the lover's face. The corners of Lin Yu's mouth also evoked a somewhat meaningful smile, and there was quite a bit of teasing in his eyes. Don't worry, I will definitely treat you well and gently. GGG. At this moment, after Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu's laughter, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on his forehead, and he became speechless for a while. I said your smile is a little too strange. After Lin Yu heard the voice of the Eternal Thunder Dragon, his expression suddenly sank, and then he said in a cold voice, What, do you have any opinion? At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon naturally did not dare to say no, so he just snorted a few times and said nothing more after that. And just after this moment, Lin Yu calmly gathered his spiritual power into his palm, and then gently transferred his spiritual power into the palm bit by bit. Among the alien eggs. At this moment, the complicated lines on this alien beast egg began to become apparent little by little. These complex lines suddenly appeared with dazzling brilliance. At this time, Lin Yu felt that the spiritual energy in his body was being absorbed so crazily by this strange beast egg. At this moment, his face gradually began to turn pale. A bit of surprise flashed through him. At this time, Lin Yu was a little stunned. He never thought that the spiritual power in his body would be completely absorbed by the alien bullet just after touching it. Clean. At this time, the alien egg was still like a greedy bandit, desperately absorbing the power emanating from Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu felt as if he had encountered an out-and-out bandit. 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. Let me go, does this little guy have such a big appetite? If this little guy is hatched, I won't be able to be sucked into a human by him. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, Eternal Thunder Dragon couldn't help but smile, and then he spoke in such a leisurely manner. Who says it's not? Anyway, I have to wish you good luck. Lin Yu. Anyway, if I don't have enough spiritual power, I'll use your spiritual power to fill it up. You won't be able to be arrogant for much longer now. Lin Yu said in a cold voice calmly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Eternal Thunder Dragon didn't say anything more. After all, he really knew Lin Yu very well. For Lin Yu, there was probably nothing that this guy wouldn't dare to do. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon, after pondering for a moment, seemed to suddenly remember something. By the way, I still have to remind you of something. What happened? It is said that Gaia, the mother of the earth, planted a power in the red sand beast. It seemed to prevent the red sand beast from being obtained by others, so Gaia, the mother of the earth, directly planted it in the red sand beast. The beast's eggshell is sealed, and once I attack, if the red-trained yellow sand beast is not hatched by Gaia, the mother of the earth, when it breaks its shell, then that power will burst out. After Lin Yu heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he was stunned. He pondered for a moment, and then said in a cold voice, I said, why did you say such an important thing now? At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu and scratched his head, and then smiled awkwardly. Actually, I don't want to say it now. The most important thing is probably because I forgot about it before, but it's not too late to say it now. At least you will be prepared by then. Lin Yu. Be prepared, my uncle. Now all the spiritual power in my body, even if it can be replenished in time, has been absorbed by this guy. Clean. I didn't buy any protective spiritual treasures before. Now I'm afraid that after this little guy hatches, I'm unlucky. You're talking to me about protection now. Isn't it a bit late? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 582. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon just had such a smile on his face, completely gloating about his misfortune. But after he heard the second half of Lin Yu's words, the Eternal Thunder Dragon could no longer laugh. By the way, I just remembered that you, a big guy with thick skin and thick flesh, can help me block that attack in a while. This can be regarded as your atonement. Eternal Thunder Dragon. As the power poured in bit by bit, the light of the lines on this alien egg began to become complete bit by bit. At this time, Lin Yu just heard a crisp click sound, and then his face suddenly gasped. Then Lin Yu's mind moved, and the Eternal Thunder Dragon appeared in front of Lin Yu. Then, a violent and fierce force suddenly hit the side of the Eternal Thunder Dragon. Finally, Lin Yu quickly pulled away and faced the other direction, dodging so suddenly. Immediately afterwards, the Eternal Thunder Dragon was hit hard on one side of the safe. However, the quality of the safe was really nothing to say. Even such a powerful attack was just holding the safe punched out an eternal brontosaurus, just a dent like its body. At this moment, Eternal Thunder Dragon was also yelling, I'll go, grandson, you are actually being serious. At this time, when Lin Yu saw the bloody Eternal Thunder Dragon on this side, a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a bit of amusement flashed in his eyes. At this time, he also coughed lightly at that time. Ahem, this, that. The Eternal Thunder Dragon was so condescending, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu, and a violent and fierce aura emitted from his body in an instant. At this time, Lin Yu hurriedly exchanged a spirit ascension pill from the store, and then threw it directly to the Eternal Thunder Dragon. I'll give you this. It can at least help you level up 2 more levels. How about it? I'm treating you well, right? Eternal Thunder Dragon looked at the Spirit Ascension pill in his hand, and then glared fiercely at Lin Yu. This one is not enough. After all, my heart has been hurt just now, you should compensate me for some mental damages no matter what. Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu just took a step forward, and then he was about to get the small white jade porcelain bottle. If you don't want it, forget it. Anyway, I don't care. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon quickly swallowed the small white jade porcelain bottle directly. The eternal thunder dragon did not even pour out the elixir, as if it was afraid that Lin Yu would snatch the elixir away. Go the same way. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but burst out laughing. The smile on his lips became more and more obvious, and there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. Color. Ha ha ha, look at your stupid look. I was just joking with you, but I didn't expect to scare you like this. At this time, Lin Yu was talking unhurriedly. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon glared at Lin Yu angrily, and then spoke coldly. Are you still kidding me? Don't think that I don't know what kind of person you are. If I hadn't swallowed this thing just now, you would definitely take it back. At this time, Lin Yu was just stunned for a moment, and then he sighed heavily. Oh, I didn't expect you to miss me so much. I originally wanted to exchange it for you for another quality upgrade. As for the high spiritual elixir, it seems that it is no longer needed now. At this moment, Eternal Thunder Dragon had a flattering smile on his face after hearing what Lin Yu said. I was just joking with you. My dear master, your image in my heart will always be the tallest and most powerful. Even the Peroni volcano will never be able to match 1/10,000th of your size. At this time, the flattering words of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were as continuous as the surging river. Lin Yu even felt faintly nauseated after hearing some of his words. At this time, Lin Yu quickly exchanged for another high-level one. Shenling Dan, without saying a word, threw it directly to the Eternal Thunder Dragon. For Eternal Thunder Dragon and Fire Kylin, only the middle Spirit Ascension pill can work on them. After they swallow the final life pill, only the high-level Spirit Ascension pill can work on them. After they finish swallowing the high-level Spirit Ascension pill, the only thing that will work for them is the Holy Spirit pill. Each time the Holy Spirit pill is redeemed, it costs 1 billion points. Anyway, Lin Yu cannot afford to redeem this Holy Spirit pill at the moment. Moreover, this Holy Spirit pill also has a special effect, that is, it will increase one talent attribute. The low-level Holy Spirit pill can increase one talent attribute. The middle Holy Spirit pill can increase 2 talent attributes. As for the high-level Holy Spirit pill, it can increase 1 talent attribute. Each exchange requires tens of billions of points, which can fully maximize the talent attributes. When Lin Yu thought about it, he felt that this was a shocking thing. However, even Lin Yu had to admit that, with his current full range, the highest he could exchange was only the high-level spiritual boosting pill. As for the Holy Spirit pill, he had no way to exchange it with his current authority. Originally, Lin Yu thought that he had more than enough to exchange 100 soul storage pills, but in the end, when Lin Yu looked at it, he found that he had consumed nearly 80 soul storage pills this time. If it weren't for a cheating user like Lin Yu, I'm afraid that ordinary masters would only be sucked dry when they came here. And what Lin Yu found most unbelievable was probably that little guy. Once you transfer your spiritual power to the moment when this strange beast is born, he will be like a greedy python, entangled with you bit by bit. It is basically impossible for you to give up, because this little guy will not agree to let you give up. So at this time, Lin Yu's heart was full of a sense of relief. Lin Yu took a deep breath, calmed down his mood a little, and then he slowly walked out. And at this time Chen Changsheng was outside. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 583. When Chen Changsheng saw that a huge convex mark suddenly appeared on one side of the safe, his face instantly changed, as if he was stunned. At this time, the corners of his eyes and eyebrows appeared. It's completely unbelievable. Chen Changsheng swallowed like this. This is said to be the hardest material in the world. It is said that even divine power cannot deform it. How much power would it take to destroy this material? After Chen Changsheng thought of this, a strange color flashed in his eyes. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly thought that the only reason for causing such a big commotion was probably the Kilian Huangsha the beast is hatched. Although everything looked calm on the outside at this time, behind the scenes it had already become a mess. At this moment, when Chen Changsheng thought of this, he notified Chen Tianyi without saying a word. Elder Dugu seemed to have no idea what kind of connections he had used, and for what reason he got the news, so he headed towards Tianbeizai. Bian rushed over frantically. As for Murongfu, when he felt Elder Dugu and Chen Tianyi rushing towards Tianbeizai at the same time, he jumped up without saying a word and then rushed towards Tianbeizai crazily. Come over. And right now, somewhere far away. Gaia, who was meditating cross-legged and gathering spiritual energy, suddenly turned ugly. Then her whole body became furious, and a violent force emitted from her body. Asshole, it's so damned, which damn guy actually hatched the red sand yellow sand beast, who is that damn guy? No matter who it is, that damn guy had better not be caught by me. If you are caught by me, I will crush every bone of yours with my own hands. At this time, Gaia was shouting hysterically. At this time, the entire mountain changed instantly, and was completely destroyed by the violent power emanating from her body. At this time, Ares, the god of war, Oceanus, and Aphrodite were as confused as 2-foot-tall monks. They had no idea why Gaia, the mother of the earth, was acting like this. Of anger. What happened to this old woman? What happened? To make this old woman angry like this is a strange thing. It is simply a strange thing. Ares, the god of war, was gloating like this. It was obvious that this little guy was still brooding over what happened last time. Oceanus on the side, after hearing what Ares, the god of war, said, was also unhappy, and glanced coldly at Ares, the god of war. I say you guy, you'd better be careful when the time comes. If that woman hears what you said, I bet you will end up in a miserable state. After Ares, the god of war, heard what Oceanus said, his face instantly turned pale. At this time, his face also condensed slightly, and then he said in a deep voice, "This is somewhat unlikely." At this time, Oceanus was staring at Ares, the god of war, with a smile on his face. There was quite a bit of joking in the corners of his eyes and brows, and the playfulness in the corners of his mouth became even more obvious. I don't need to tell you what kind of character that woman is. You should know it, so when she is in a bad mood, I advise you to be careful. At this time, Ares, the god of war, remembered what happened last time, and still couldn't help but shudder. He just shook his head, and then said in a cold voice, "No, we absolutely cannot continue like this. That crazy woman is simply a complete lunatic." At this time, Lin Yu glanced in the direction of the alien egg, and then he saw a little guy with a tiger-like head and a tiger-like head, and he slowly poked his head out. When this red-trained yellow sand beast just hatched, it was extremely cute. It looked like a puppy, but it had 9 heads and a pair of small fleshy wings on its back. His 9 heads each is different. At this time, Lin Yu hurriedly ran in front of the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast, and then gently bit his fingertips and pointed at the head in the center of the scarlet-trained yellow sand beast. Just clicked lightly here. At this time, the red-trained yellow sand beast was also extremely cooperative and absorbed Lin Yu's essence and blood. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon saw this scene, it also transformed into a figure similar to Lin Yu, and then he stretched out his claws and grabbed the red sand beast. Then there was a war, and the sharp front suddenly moved towards the Eternal Thunder Dragon. The war front looked like it wanted to completely destroy the Eternal Thunder Dragon. Same. After seeing this scene, the Eternal Thunder Dragon was furious. The thunder and lightning power on the Eternal Thunder Dragon attacked crazily towards the red-trained yellow sand beast. However, although the red-trained yellow sand beast was small, it was not a vegetarian. At this moment, in front of the red-trained yellow sand beast, there was suddenly a barrier made of sand. The barrier suddenly blocked the power of thunder and lightning, but the war wind directly blew the eternal thunder dragon away. In the end, the eternal thunder dragon hit this place so hard again on the wall. But this time, the eternal thunder dragon did not deform the left wall. Lin Yu couldn't help laughing when he saw the eternal thunder dragon in such a miserable state. He stared at the eternal thunder dragon with a smile on his face, and then said softly, "No, I didn't expect you to be in such a mess. Do you still dare to look down on this red sand beast?" Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this, the smile at the corner of his mouth becoming more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of teasing in his eyes. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he let out an angry roar. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 584. At this moment, Lin Yu just glared at the eternal thunder dragon fiercely. At this time, the majesty of Lin Yu also burst out, because Lin Yu really felt the eternal thunder dragon at that moment, and it seemed that he really had a little hostility towards him. This feeling is what Lin Yu dislikes the most. Lin Yu just thinks that the eternal thunder dragon is a little difficult to discipline, but if he shows this kind of hostility, Lin Yu will naturally not indulge the eternal thunder dragon. The eternal thunder dragon seems to have felt the majesty of Lin Yu. Although he is extremely angry at this moment, he still forcibly suppresses the anger in his heart. Lin Yu just snorted coldly, "You must remember that I am your master at any time. I really want to be friends with you, but the premise of being friends is that you cannot have this kind of hostility towards friends. Do you understand?" At this time, the eternal thunder dragon was like a primary school student who made a mistake in front of Lin Yu, and then he slowly lowered his head and nodded. Lin Yu suddenly felt that the eternal thunder dragon was a little aggrieved, just like a parent who loves and hates his child when he makes a mistake. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly felt that he didn't know why. He always felt that the eternal thunder dragon seemed a little unreliable, so at this time his eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, and his face was slightly condensed. The eternal thunder dragon also buried his head, with a low-browed and pleasing look on his face, and his eyes were full of aggrieved. After a while, Lin Yu also coughed lightly, and then turned his head and looked at the eternal thunder dragon. The eternal thunder dragon then turned his head away, with a low-browed and pleasing look on his face, and there was a bit of respect between his eyebrows. At this time, Lin Yu opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed the words back abruptly. After a long while, he just sighed and waved his hand gently. Well, let's just forget about this for now. I don't want to say anything more, but if you dare to do this again in the future, don't blame me for being rude to you. Lin Yu's voice was not small. After seeing this scene, the eternal thunder dragon had a helpless look on his face. After a moment, he nodded gently. Okay, I will remember this in the future," the eternal thunder dragon said in a low voice at this time. After hearing what the eternal thunder dragon said, Lin Yu nodded gently, with a bit of satisfaction flashing in his eyes, and then he suddenly stepped up and walked out. After seeing Lin Yu like this, the eternal thunder dragon just pondered for a moment, and then returned to Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. At this time, Chen Tianyi and Elder Dugu had already come to the door. When they came here, they stared straight into the room. At this time, after seeing this scene, the faces of several people were slightly raised, and there was a sense of surprise in the corners of their eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Elder Dugu pondered for a moment, and then he coughed lightly. Ahem, now it seems that this little guy should have succeeded, but why this little guy has obviously succeeded, but he doesn't come out, what's going on? Elder Dugu's face was also slightly raised, and then he turned his head and looked at the crowd, with a sense of confusion in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, after hearing what Elder Dugu said, everyone shook their heads. The beauties were all confused and didn't know why Lin Yu was still here. After a while, Elder Dugu, Chen Tianyi, and Murong Fu stood at the door, pacing back and forth. At this time, Dugu Qinghong saw that the three of them had gathered together, and there was no quarrel, which was rare. Dugu Qinghong stared at the three of them with a smile on his face, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and then he gently touched his chin, with a playful look in his eyes. Interesting, really interesting. At this time, Dugu Qinghong came to Elder Dugu and smiled. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" After hearing Dugu Qinghong's voice, Elder Dugu turned his head and glanced at Dugu Qinghong casually, with a complicated look in his eyes, and then he coughed lightly. "Ahem, we are here, we are here." When Elder Dugu said this, he suddenly stopped. After seeing this scene, Dugu Qinghong also felt a little strange, so he stared at Elder Dugu and looked at him with a smile on his face. "Grandpa, what do you want to do? Don't continue to talk about it here, people are curious. Tell me quickly." At this time, Dugu Qinghong was acting coquettishly and speaking softly. At this time, after Elder Dugu saw this scene, his expression was slightly raised, and then he coughed lightly. "Ahem, a kid or a girl, why are you so curious? Hurry up and stay aside." Elder Dugu rolled his eyes at Dugu Qinghong angrily, and then spoke softly. After waiting for a while, Dugu Qinghong glanced at his mouth, then coughed faintly and spoke unhurriedly. "Tch, if you don't want to say it, don't say it. If you don't want to say it, I don't want to hear it." Dugu Qinghong said softly, and then turned his head to the side. After seeing this scene, Elder Dugu had a somewhat helpless expression on his face, and then he coughed lightly and smiled. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 585. Ahem, okay, don't be angry, my good granddaughter. In fact, it wasn't that little guy who hatched the alien egg that was expected to be promoted to the divine mirror. If not, how could he have done it? Make such a big noise. At this time, Elder Dugu said helplessly, with a hint of helplessness between his brows and a slightly raised look on his face. After Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, the corners of her eyes and brows were filled with a look of complete surprise. At this time, her eyes were staring directly at Elder Dugu, and her expression was slightly condensed. "How is it possible? Grandpa, are you sure?" Dugu Qinghong's eyes stared directly at Elder Dugu, with a somewhat complicated meaning in his eyes. After waiting for a while, Elder Dugu just coughed lightly, and then smiled like this. "Ahem, of course it is. If it hadn't been like this, how could I have come here to wait for this little guy in person at this old age?" At this moment, Elder Dugu seemed to have remembered something, and then he lowered his voice and whispered to Dugu Qinghong. "Actually, I came here to take a look this time, not because I was afraid that the little guy would be plotted by these guys. Although Chen Tianyi may not do such a shameless thing, I can't say for sure about Murong Fu. Don't forget that this strange beast is expected to be promoted to the realm of gods." Elder Dugu said this unhurriedly, and then turned his head, staring directly at Dugu Qinghong, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, after Dugu Qinghong heard what Elder Dugu said, his expression also slightly raised, and then he half closed his eyes. "Grandpa, are you telling the truth?" At this time, Dugu's green eyes were staring straight at Elder Dugu. The corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a sense of surprise, and his face suddenly sank. After waiting for a while, Elder Dugu nodded slightly, then lowered his voice and spoke softly. "That's natural, but don't be too happy now. I always feel that something might happen, but I can't tell what will happen." Elder Dugu said in a cold voice, with a hint of helplessness between his brows, and his face sank slightly. After waiting for a while, Dugu Qinghong just waved his hand casually, and then smiled like this. It doesn't matter, there's no need to worry about that. I believe in your strength, Grandpa. With your current strength, there is no problem if you want to safely protect that boy's wealth and life. Dugu Qinghong stared at the poisonous malfunction with a smile on his face, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Elder Dugu just glared at Dugu Qinghong angrily, and then spoke softly. Ahem, you little girl, you are good at flattering me, but I like to hear your flattery. Ha ha ha. And at this moment, Lin Yu slowly walked out of it. Next to Lin Yu was of course Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng was as listless as an eggplant beaten by frost. There is a complete sense of helplessness in it. At this time, Lin Yu slowly walked out of it, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, he was full of energy, and the corners of his eyes and brows were completely filled with emotion. It is a color of joy. At this moment, Chen Changsheng turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, you little guy, you must take care of yourself. I won't say anything else for now. Chen Changsheng said softly, with a helpless look on his brows, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. It was obvious that Chen Changsheng had no choice but to face Lin Yu at this moment. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Chen Changsheng said, he also stared at Chen Changsheng with a smile on his face, and then walked towards Chen Changsheng. Ha ha ha, I have to thank you, Senior, this time. Without your help, Senior, I would never have been able to hatch this alien egg so easily this time. At this time, Chen Changsheng's heart was bleeding after hearing what Lin Yu said. At this time, Chen Tianyi's face suddenly became ugly. Chen Tianyi's brows seemed to be knitted together. At this time, his whole body began to tremble violently. He just took a deep breath, and then calmed down slightly. Feeling. It seems that such a good egg and this little guy are quite destined. I have found countless people to try, but without exception they all failed, but this little guy is the only one who succeeded this time. It seems that God's will is so, God's will is this. At this moment, they began to compliment Lin Yu. After hearing what they said, the sneer on Lin Yu's lips became more and more obvious, and his eyes were full of contempt. At this time, Lin Yu just coughed lightly. Ahem, in fact, this is just a fluke for me, a fluke, everyone doesn't need to be like this, everyone doesn't need to be like this. Lin Yu said softly and slowly. And at this moment, Mirongfu, who was still at the back, spoke like this. This young friend looks unfamiliar, and he must be a newcomer to the War Academy. In order to express his welcome, the Battle City decided to hold a party for this young friend. Mirongfu suddenly spoke like this. The terrible thing about Mirongfu is that he is the mayor of the Battle City. In fact, in terms of status, he is superior to Chen Tianyi and Elder Dugu. Of course, although this is the fact, these two old guys have never been willing to admit it. However, although they themselves do not admit it, they sometimes have to admit it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 586. After waiting for a while, Chen Tianyi seemed to have remembered something, and then turned his head, glanced at Mirongfu, and then nodded and smiled in the same way. Yes, since old man Mirong has said so, I think it is necessary to hold this event. Of course Elder Dugu understood that these two old guys were just trying to get closer to Lin Yu. After all, even if something unexpected happened, they would still have a way out for themselves. It's natural for old guys like them who have lived for such a long time to leave a way out for themselves. After waiting for a while, Elder Dugu also took a step forward, and gently patted Lin Yu's shoulder. Little guy, when you go to the banquet this time, the people who come will definitely be the extremely talented disciples of the Battle Academy, as well as the celebrities and nobles in the entire Battle Kingdom. You must not embarrass me then. The reason why Elder Dugu did this was entirely to declare his sovereignty and to tell everyone that Lin Yu was his. When everyone heard what Elder Dugu said, they couldn't help but secretly clenched their fists, and then spat lightly. After Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, although he looked happy, he always felt that there was something wrong, but he didn't find anything. Dugu Qinghong glanced at Lin Yu, and then smiled like this, "I didn't expect you to be really popular. This is really something I didn't expect." Lin Yu just scratched his head, smiled, and then said softly, "It's just that they take great care of the younger generation. These are not my fault, but for the sake of Elder Dugu." Elder Dugu on the side just coughed lightly after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then deliberately pretended to be unhappy. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something, and just smiled, then turned his head, glanced at Elder Dugu, and finally said in a low voice saying, "Teacher." At this time, Elder Dugu beamed with joy, and then nodded with satisfaction. Lin Yu glanced at everyone, and then others smiled slightly, and then gave a fist cup salute to everyone. "Thank you all for being so kind. However, I am a little tired now and would like to take a rest first. However, since Lord Murong kindly invites me tonight, I will still go." Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. He just stared at everyone present. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something, and his expression also twitched slightly. At this time, Dugu Qinghong also noticed something strange about Lin Yu, so she turned her head, glanced at Lin Yu, stared at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and then said softly asking, "Did you think of something just now? Is there anything you want to ask? In fact, you don't have to be restrained at all. If you have anything you want to ask, just ask." After Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he coughed lightly, and then gently scratched Dugu Qinghong's little nose, and the few points at the corners of his mouth. The smile became more and more obvious. "Although I have something I want to ask, after thinking about it, there is no need." At this time, Lin Yu was talking unhurriedly. After Dugu Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, her whole brow seemed to be together, and her eyes were filled with confusion. "Really not?" Dugu Qinghong's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and his expression was slightly condensed. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu seemed to hear something, and then he whispered in Dugu Qinghong's ear, "If so, don't you have to guess this yourself?" Lin Yu just said softly, with a rather playful look in his eyes, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, after Dugu Qinghong saw this scene, he just snorted coldly, and then said in a deep voice, "Tisk, forget it if you don't say it. If you don't want to say it, I don't want to hear it yet." Dugu Qinghong said softly, and then turned his head like this. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he couldn't help laughing, and then waved his hand casually. "Ha ha ha, you silly girl, forget it, I won't joke with you anymore." At this time, Dugu Qinghong was just so beautiful. She rolled her eyes at Lin Yu angrily, then waved her fist, and then said in a deep voice, if you keep acting like this, I won't care about you anymore." At this time, after hearing what Dugu Qinghong said, Lin Yu couldn't help but smile slightly, and then nodded and turned around, staring at Dugu Qinghong with a bit of teasing between his eyebrows. At this time, Dugu Qinghong saw Lin Yu like this, and glared at Lin Yu fiercely, and then changed, and said unhappily, "What? Is there any problem?" At this time, after hearing what Dugu Qinghong said, Lin Yu naturally didn't dare to say anything more, so he could only nod slightly. After a while, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something, turned his head and looked at Dugu Qinghong, and then whispered in Dugu Qinghong's ear. Actually, there is no big problem, I just find it a little interesting. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Zhuge Qinghong seemed to be stunned for a moment. He turned his head and stared at Lin Yu, his face slightly tense, and finally said softly. Problem? What problem? At this time, Lin Yu's mouth corners raised a hint of evil arc. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 587. Nothing, nothing. Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly. At this time, Lin Yu coughed lightly, a strange color flashed in his eyes, and then his brows also wrinkled slightly, but the smile at the corner of his mouth became even more, it became increasingly clear. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong always felt that Lin Yu was hiding something from him on purpose, so Zhuge Qinghong always kept his eyes on Lin Yu. After waiting for a while, Zhuge Qinghong coughed lightly, and then said in a low voice, "What are you going to do this time?" Zhuge Qinghong's eyes stared directly at Lin Yu, his face turned ugly for a moment, and there was a hint of confusion between his brows. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, he was also slightly stunned. After thinking for a moment, he also rubbed his chin. Actually, to be honest, I haven't really thought about what to do now, but I always feel that things are not that simple this time. When talking to others, Lin Yu might still have some reservations, but when talking to Zhuge Qinghong, Lin Yu felt that the little girl in front of him was trustworthy enough. So at this time, Lin Yu was talking so unhurriedly, and a strange color flashed between his eyebrows. After waiting for a while, Zhuge Qinghong seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and he pinned Lin Yu's body with a smile on his face. Lin Yu's scalp even felt a little numb when he looked at Meng Guang. At this time, Lin Yu coughed lightly. Ahem, you, do you have anything to say? Zhuge Qinghong nodded slightly. I do have something to say, but I just want to remind you that you must be careful about that Murongfu. That guy is cunning and deceitful. He usually commits deceit and abduction and does all kinds of evil. This time, he is being courteous for nothing and is not a treacherous person. There must be something wrong with stealing. Zhuge Qinghong said softly like this, with a hint of seclusion in the corners of his eyes and brows, and his face looked ugly in an instant. After Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, he nodded slightly, with a wry smile on his lips. At this moment, Lin Yu was thinking, I'm afraid not to mention them, even your grandfather may not have any good intentions now. But Lin Yu just wanted to think so, but he didn't say it out loud. Zhuge Qinghong saw Lin Yu's expression was a little strange, and a bit of curiosity flashed in his eyes. He frowned slightly, and then said softly, do you have something to say? At this time, Lin Yu also nodded slightly, but after he reacted, he shook his head subconsciously, then quickly waved his hand, and finally just looked at Zhuge Qinghong. Bian smiled. Nothing, nothing, I have nothing to say, nothing to say. Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and then he stared at Zhuge Qinghong with a smile on his face, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. But after Zhuge Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, a hint of suspicion clearly flashed across his face, and then he looked straight at Lin Yu. Are you telling the truth? At this time, Lin Yu quickly changed the topic. After all, Zhuge Qinghong was a pretty good girl, and Lin Yu really didn't have any bad feelings towards her, so naturally he didn't want to antagonize her. Lin Yu nodded solemnly, with a bit of sincerity in his eyes, it's absolutely true, not even half a lie. At this time, when Zhuge Qinghong saw Lin Yu looking so serious, he couldn't help but flutter and suddenly smiled. Ha ha ha, look at how stupid you are, hurry up and get ready, otherwise I'm afraid there will be some trouble. After Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, his expression couldn't help but twist slightly, and then he also frowned like this, will there be trouble? What trouble will there be? Zhuge Qinghong just rolled her eyes at Lin Yu angrily, what do you think? You didn't think Murongkong was really that grown up about what happened before, so you could pretend to have nothing to do with you. After Lin Yu heard what Zhuge Qinghong said, he was slightly stunned. Then he pondered for a moment, and then nodded slightly. Indeed, if you hadn't said anything, I would have completely forgotten about this matter. That guy Murongkong will definitely take the opportunity to cause trouble for me this time. The two of them came to Zhuge's house as they talked. Lin Yu returned to his room, and then immediately closed the door. At this time, after Lin Yu closed the door, he narrowed his eyes. Well, I don't know why there hasn't been any movement from Gaia, the mother of the earth, but I feel that that guy may not be able to bear it for too long. If that's the case, I'm afraid that by then. After Lin Yu said this, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh. When the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu say this, he just laughed, and then continued to speak in a deep voice. Ha ha ha, in fact, for you, there is no need to consider so much. When the enemy comes, the general will fight, when the water comes, the earth will cover it. Why bother so much? Wang Guililong said this in a leisurely and soft voice, and then he also nailed to Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became clearer and clearer. At this time, after hearing what Wang Guililong said, Lin Yu just pondered for a moment, and then frowned slightly. Do you know something? Looking at you like this, I bet you definitely know something. Stop talking nonsense and tell me what you know. At this time, Lin Yu was indeed very urgent. After all, it can be said that there are wolves in front and tigers behind, and he can only move step by step, so this is the most headache for Lin Yu. When Lin Yu thought of this, there was a bit of strange light between his eyebrows, and then his brows were slightly frowned. After waiting for a while, the Eternal Thunder Dragon also sighed, and finally his brows seemed to be twisted together. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 588. Actually, I do have some premonitions now, but I hope that my premonition is false. However, according to the current situation, my feeling is very likely to be true, so this is the most troublesome part. Wang Guililong said helplessly, with a bit of deep meaning in his words. He just pondered for a moment, and then shook his head slightly. At this moment, Lin Yu was like a monk who was at a loss after seeing this scene. What do you mean by this? Don't keep me in suspense now. Tell me the situation quickly. It's very urgent. At this time, Lin Yu's face was full of confusion. At this time, Wang Guililong's face tightened slightly after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then he just coughed lightly and pondered for a moment. This, that. Wang Guililong, after waiting for a long time, did not give Lin Yu any answer. At this time, Lin Yu heard Wang Guililong's words, and his face tightened slightly after he said this. What's wrong? At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon also sighed quietly, and after a while, he gritted his teeth, as if he had made up his mind, and then he began to speak to Lin Yu slowly. In fact, it's not a big deal, it's just that they are going to unseal a very terrifying person, and it is said that the War of the Gods that year was completely caused by him. In the eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon, there was a feeling of hopelessness, his brows seemed to be twisted together, and finally there was a kind of fear in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Even now, when the Eternal Thunder Dragon recalled the scene of the war that year, he still felt that the thousands of troops seemed to whiz by him. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon thought of this, his face began to gradually become ugly, his brows seemed to be twisted together, and the whole person's eyes and eyebrows were full of panic. At this time, Lin Yu saw the Eternal Thunder Dragon. After this, he coughed lightly, and then turned around, his eyes fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. What happened? If you have anything to say, just tell me. You know that I will fight back when the enemy comes, and when will the enemy come, I will block it with earth. When have I ever been afraid? A bit of determination flashed in Lin Yu's eyes. His eyes looked straight at the eternal thunder dragon. A bit of smile flashed on his face, and the corners of his mouth were even more perfect. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the eternal thunder dragon just pondered for a moment, and then gritted his teeth, as if he had made up his mind. Okay, since the words have come to this point, I have nothing to say, I will say. After the eternal thunder dragon said this, a bit of memories flashed on his face. It turned out that in ancient times, the gods were relatively stable, and everything was peaceful and harmonious. Although the gods were slightly dissatisfied with Zeus' rule, they could only avoid his edge for the time being due to Zeus's terrifying majesty. But I don't know when, the arrival of a person suddenly broke the original peace. That person came here, he first found the god of war Ares, took advantage of Ares's gear and rage, so he took the opportunity to subdue Ares, and then won over Oceanus with unknown conditions. With these two people, that person retreated behind the scenes, just secretly providing help between the two of them. The two of them found Aphrodite and promised Aphrodite a condition that she could not refuse, but no one knew what the specific condition was. After doing all this, they didn't know how to win over Gaia, the mother of the earth. These people joined the gods who had long been dissatisfied with Zeus and launched an attack on Zeus. At first, Zeus didn't take the pig god seriously. He just thought that it was a fantasy to use the power of the gods to fight against him. But later, when he knew that the gods joined the battlefield and attacked the city one after another, Zeus began to realize how terrible the danger was. Because of the successive failures of the gods, those failures made Zeus feel uneasy. In the end, Zeus couldn't help but personally come forward to meet the enemy, but even Zeus was no match for the mysterious man. In the end, Zeus was defeated. At this time, all the gods fell into a carnival after seeing Zeus's defeat. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the eternal thunder dragon said, his eyebrows seemed to be squeezed together, and then he shook his head and frowned slightly. Wait, it seems something is wrong. After hearing Lin Yu say this, the face of the eternal thunder dragon was instantly frozen, and then he said it in a low voice. No. What's wrong? After a moment's hesitation, Lin Yu said slowly, let's not talk about other things for now. According to your description, the ancient war of the gods shouldn't be so tragic. Shouldn't the situation at the beginning be one-sided? Lin Yu said this in a slow and gentle voice, and then he turned his head and stared at the eternal thunder dragon, his expression instantly frozen. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon couldn't help shaking his head and smiling after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then he coughed lightly. Ahem, this is not it? After Lin Yu heard what the eternal thunder dragon said, a strange light flashed in his eyes, and then he frowned slightly. What do you mean by this? Why don't I understand it? The corners of the eternal thunder dragon's mouth raised a few meaningful confusions, and a hint of playfulness flashed in his eyes. You think the ancient war of the gods should have come to an end, right? The eternal thunder dragon stared at Lin Yu, and then he said with a smile on his face. Seeing the eternal thunder dragon like this, Lin Yu nodded subconsciously. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 589. But who knows that the current eternal thunder dragon just shook his head, and then a bit of desolation flashed in his eyes, and a bit of bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I want to remind you that you are really wrong. This is not the end at all. This is just a beginning. The voice of the eternal thunder dragon was a little low, and his voice was slightly hoarse. There was a kind of helplessness between his eyebrows, and a bit of bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this time, after hearing what the eternal thunder dragon said, Lin Yu was stunned in an instant. His eyes stared at the eternal thunder dragon, and then he shook his head slightly. How is it possible? Are you sure you are not lying to me? How can it be just a beginning? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, and his face was slightly tight. The corner of the mouth of the eternal thunder dragon also raised a few bitter smiles. Don't be so anxious, just listen to me slowly. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon began to talk about this matter slowly. The eternal thunder dragon once again said this. It turned out that after Zeus was defeated, he was not captured, let alone killed, but escaped directly. After escaping, Zeus was naturally unwilling. After Hera was caught by the gods, he prepared for trial. But I don't know why, the black-robed man just took Hera away. Anyway, after the black-robed man took Hera away, Hera never appeared in front of the gods again. After Zeus left, he came directly to the end of the universe. In fact, the end of the universe is a void and a dead end. Behind the void and a dead end, there is a door to another world. I used to smuggle in that other world, just trying to explore his consciousness tentatively, but later Zeus only got a result that he found extremely hard to believe. It turns out that at the end of this universe, there is another world connected to it. In that world, there is an existence that is more terrifying than the gods, and that existence has been trying to break the space barrier between the two worlds. The reason is nothing but to come here and colonize. When Zeus found out about this result, he was also shocked at that time, so he sealed this place as a Jedi and ordered everyone not to approach. Although the gods were very curious about the reason for this decision, with Zeus's majesty and prestige at the time, he did not allow everyone to question himself at all, so those gods were very curious, but they did not question Zeus for this reason. Although some gods who were not afraid of death came here at the beginning, they left directly after they did not find anything here. After Zeus got the news that those gods had come here, he ordered all of them to be executed without any reason. Those poor gods fell in an instant. It was precisely because of such a decision that no one really dared to approach this place again. It is precisely because of this that the secret is probably unknown to anyone except Zeus in the entire universe. When Zeus arrived here, he stared at the endless abyss with his eyes fixed on it. He was a little entangled at this time. He didn't know whether he should do this or not. But when Zeus recalled the humiliation he suffered at this time, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. At this time, a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes, and the cold momentum on the mountain was revealed at this moment. Assholes, I want you to die, I want you all to die. Zeus was obviously hysterical at this time, so he could no longer care about anything else, and then he just took out the Thor's hammer, and then suddenly swung it heavily into the void. A force of thunder and lightning suddenly gathered in the endless void. After just a moment, the endless divine power on the Thor's hammer directly cut through the sky and opened the long-sealed door again. The countless gods, ghosts, and monsters contained in the door crawled out from the door continuously. To be precise, they were all monsters, and those monsters were not three-dimensional creatures at all. For those monsters, they might come from 4 dimensions or higher dimensions, and they didn't have any entity at all. To be precise, if they wanted, they could become everything. When they crawled out of the door, they set their sights on Zeus in front of them. Zeus was in front of them, so he had some resistance, but his resistance was extremely weak. Although Zeus was controlled by them after he knocked down several 4-dimensional creatures, it still showed how terrible those 4-dimensional creatures were. Those 4-dimensional creatures directly controlled Zeus, and the most terrifying thing was that there were countless terrifying 4-dimensional creatures sealed in Zeus' body. Fortunately, the laws of time and space in this area also have some constraints on these 4-dimensional creatures. Once 4-dimensional creatures are discovered, these laws of time and space will directly crush them completely, so they can only hide in the bodies of gods. Of course Zeus is their best carrier. When Zeus appeared in front of everyone again, the Zeus at that time could no longer be called Zeus. At that time, he was just a walking zombie. After seeing the return of Zeus, the gods felt as if they were facing a formidable enemy, and they really paid enough attention to Zeus. So they immediately gathered their troops and prepared to attack Zeus again. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the eternal thunder dragon said, a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. His eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, and his face looked like this. He paused for a moment, then pondered for a moment. If those four-dimensional creatures are really as terrifying as you said, then this ancient battlefield should have a one-sided ending. I'm afraid it shouldn't be. Lin Yu paused immediately after saying this, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 590. Of course, Eternal Thunder Dragon understood what Lin Yu wanted to say. At this time, Eternal Thunder Dragon just smiled bitterly. Ahem, what you said is indeed true. In fact, if there hadn't been that person at the beginning, perhaps this world may no longer exist. Lin Yu nodded slightly, then glanced at Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then said in a low voice, "But why did things become like this in the end?" The Eternal Thunder Dragon then said softly, "This is because those powerful beast masters in the Dragon Kingdom went forward one after another and died generously. In that vast era, after the ancient gods came to know the secret of Zeus, they fled everywhere and did not dare to confront Zeus. At this time, they were already frightened by a wave of fear. Wrapped in this idea, he did not dare to face Zeus directly. And those guys who tried to join Zeus were all killed by Zeus without exception. After Zeus killed those guys, he began to hunt down other gods. Later, Zeus even wanted to conquer the dragon country. It was precisely because of this action that Zeus was destroyed. At first, Zeus thought that he could definitely kill those people from the Dragon Kingdom on his own. But later it turned out that Zeus did have some complicated thoughts, and the people of the Dragon Kingdom were simply not something he could fight against. As for Zeus, he didn't think he could deal with those bugs or ordinary guys, so he came to the Dragon Kingdom alone, but he didn't expect that he would be resisted by so many people in the Dragon Kingdom and would fight to the death. So Zeus was stunned at this time. He didn't expect that his move would arouse the anger of so many people. Those people desperately resisted Zeus, and there were even several beast masters who had stepped into the realm of the Creator God and stood up. Even if they are as strong as those four-dimensional creatures, it is basically a fantasy to fight against the alien beasts in the realm of the Creator God. It is difficult for them to deal with the alien beasts that have already entered the realm of the Creator God. As for the alien beasts that have entered the realm of the Creator God, it is not easy to deal with these four-dimensional creatures. The two sides went through this dark struggle, which lasted for nearly hundreds of days. Until the end, when the alien beast in the realm of the creation god was about to run out of oil, it fought for the last breath of strength, and then forced it. He completely sealed Zeus, and it was precisely because of the seal that he could gain this short-term peace. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon spoke softly and unhurriedly, with a bit of helplessness in his eyes, and a bit of a wry smile on the corner of his mouth. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the eternal thunder dragon said, he was stunned for an instant. His eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, and his face was slightly raised. I didn't expect the story to be so twisty. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He turned his head and glanced at Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then said softly, "If this is really the case, so according to what you mean, isn't Zeus now sealed in the Dragon Kingdom?" Lin Yu said softly, and then turned his head and glanced at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. There was quite a bit of curiosity in his eyes. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Eternal Thunder Dragon nodded gently. "That's right, maybe that guy thought I was pretty good, so when he went to conquer the Dragon Kingdom, he actually took me with him, and it was only later that I realized the terrifying four-dimensional creature in his body. After the evil intentions of the power, who Bien escaped secretly, but I thought that Zeus might be able to break away from their control, so I kept observing in secret, but I didn't want to. When the eternal thunder dragon said this, he stopped his mother and son directly, with a sense of sadness in his eyes, and a look of complete helplessness in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu's face looked slightly desolate. I didn't expect you to be quite loyal. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, with a hint of amusement flashing in his eyes, and then his eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon. With those few words at the corner of his mouth, Fen's smile became more and more obvious. At this time, after Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. He just rolled his eyes at Lin Yu in annoyance. Why does it feel like there is a meaning behind your words? At this time, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, then waved his hands casually and smiled, and then said softly, "Of course it's nothing, don't take this too seriously. I keep it in mind, I'm just joking with you." Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. At this time, after Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, he immediately realized that something was wrong with this matter, and his eyes were staring at Lin Yu so tightly. "I guess what you just said was not a good thing. This Eternal Thunder Dragon is a little cute." Lin Yu couldn't help laughing after hearing what Eternal Thunder Dragon said. "Ha ha ha, then you can also tell me what I just said. What exactly does it mean? I don't quite understand it either." Lin Yu said this in a leisurely and soft voice, and the playful smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After a while, Eternal Thunder Dragon seemed to suddenly remember something, and just pondered for a moment. Hee, don't worry about these for now, the red snake yellow sand beast should be taken out for a look, this little guy is a little strange. After Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he couldn't help but half closed his eyes, and then turned his head and looked at Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then said softly, "A little strange. What's strange?" Eternal Thunder Dragon just frowned slightly, and then thought for a while.